Representative Mickelsen, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. Thank you for coming in. You and I have been lining up a conversation for some time. We finally make it here before the end of the session. Thank God. There's a lot. God bless it. You got high energy around a couple topics, and I'm going to tap into that. First, talk to me about 1023.
So 1023 is billed as a medical freedom bill.
Okay.
And I have no problem with people having medical freedom. But the problem is when you look lower down on the bill, it talks about any medical intervention, meaning vaccinations, treatments for contagious diseases, any kind of thing that a person wouldn't have to have any of those things. And I have no problem with that if that's what you want to do. But the problem is it comes into businesses saying no business can refuse service or admittance into their business with somebody that's refusing to have any medical interventions.
Okay. Hang on. Okay. So medical freedom. So essentially what I've pieced together with this bill is that you have a prohibition from the state level. This would be a prohibition from the state level for individual privately owned businesses to deny service or entrance from just random patrons who might be like incredibly ill, who could be, and that's the nature of like the medical intervention. Is that what it means?
Yes. So it means anything. It's no vaccination, no treatment. If you had somebody that came in and obviously showed signs of, say, the measles, and we know we have measles outbreaks right now, and contrary to most people's popular belief, the measles can leave children with no hearing. It can kill children. I mean, they had, I think, 20 cases at one point early on in Texas, and they had 13 of those 20 had been hospitalized. So if you're a business, think about if you're a movie theater and you have somebody comes in and they have the measles and you have no way to say, you know what, you look sick today, I'm sorry, but come back when you're well. Then what happens is a private business gets injured by that because they have reputational harm that comes to them because under this bill, they have to allow everybody in. They can't deny any admittance. They can't require any kind of, covering your mouth and nose type things, because we've said that's all against the rules these days. But then the business that takes them in, if they have that spread and their business, like a theater, became the super spreader for measles, man, they're going to have terrible reputational harm. And it's because we put a state law into effect that gave them no protection to say, you know what, not today. You can't come in today. And on the other side of that, you think about this same group of people when a cake decorator person wanted to deny making a cake, they were all behind them having their rights to not make a cake for people that's religious values didn't align with theirs. But here on this side, if a business doesn't align with somebody's medical freedom values, they're going to have to serve them. They're going to have to allow them into their place of business. And that's where I think it crosses the line.
Okay. I was thinking about that exact thing. Okay. And I didn't hear about this bill till this morning. So walk me back here. What is the state's compelled interest to intervene in private business agreements? Like if I own a business, I think everybody hates the idea of being forced to do business with somebody they don't want to do business with for whatever reason, right? Like and we have very limited, restrictions on this as we should, and very limited interventions from the state. So like, what's the compelling interest here for the state to be like, no, you will serve this person. Like you have to do this. For what purpose?
I think we've gotten to be where we're having the tyranny of the minority rather than the reality of the majority on this particular issue. I don't think the state has a compelling interest, but it listed out schools, private or public schools. So even private schools, say you have a kid that comes in with lice, right? You have a kid that comes in with lice. Now, I don't know if you've ever had to deal with a situation with lice in your family. I had a friend that had it, that's kid picked it up from another kid at school, right? You have to sterilize your entire house. So think about if you have a kid that comes to school that has an active case of lice, under this bill, the school has no way to say you can't come to school, you need to go have a medical intervention, you need to get rid of the lice in your hair, nothing. And it would be the same thing for a business. So if you have, say, a concert event, right? And you see somebody with an active case of lice, you can't say, I'm sorry, you can't come in today. So what happened to the no shirt, no shoes, no service? You mean that private businesses get to set the standards for people to come into their business or to come into their, place of operation? I can understand saying you can't require people to be vaccinated. If
Sure.
I have no problem with that. And we have that right now. In fact, everybody says, well, on the school level, they can't. All they have to do is fill out the thing that says, I don't want my children to be vaccinated. I have some sort of disagreement with it. But I do not believe that there's a compelling public interest that we would make private businesses have to take anybody in any condition in any way, shape, or form. And you think about that when you take that into a food service type situation or a food industry type situation. So if I have, say, a restaurant that has a buffet and I've got somebody that has an active case of measles
Never
or
going to Country
Ebola,
Kitchen again.
Ebola
Get out
or
of here with
anything.
Ebola. That's ridiculous.
Okay, well,
Nobody...
well, whatever. I mean, because at some point you're going to have something like that, right?
Sure.
And now you're telling private businesses you have no way to protect yourself or to say, I don't want these people in here, but you're the one that's going to suffer reputational harm that could destroy your business.
I just don't understand the okay, yes to everything, even the Ebola comment. Okay, yes to Ebola. We don't want Ebola, no Country Kitchen buffet, don't go to Vegas ever again. Like the whole thing, I got it. But like what? I just don't understand the socialistic nature of like, I'm going to tell you who you can and cannot do business with. Like that doesn't make sense, especially with such a broad problem and cross industry. It's not just like, okay, look, if you're whatever it is, this is like, what's the precedence behind this? Why are people doing this? I understand. Let me be really clear. In my former state that shall not be named, there was a time when it was like, oh no, you had to show like your card to the Gestapo, like you had to show your papers to go anywhere, and it was not good. And like this is wild, and there was rampant fraud. Like nobody actually cared, but people were just going along with it. Like everybody's lying. The people checking the cards are lying. The people providing the cards are lying. Like this is terrible, horrible situation. Let's not go there. But beyond that, why engage in telling people you have to do business? Like, do we have a lot of cases where like there are these large groups of people saying like, oh my gosh, I was denied, entry into this buffet because I was coughing. Like, state of Idaho, you have to help me with this because I should be able to go into the buffet whether or not I'm hacking up a lung or not.
Well, I think it comes back to we had people really upset over the COVID situation. And I think some of them had legitimate reasons why they got upset about it. But at the same time, I think we're going too far in this because it took a COVID, what it was the COVID Act. And now they just made it for everything medical in any way, shape, or form. And then not only that, they made it into every business. And so from my perspective, there is no compelling public interest to require businesses to this level because you've basically created a socialistic system, right?
Right.
Instead of capitalism and let capital, because if you have the capital and the market will drive things. So if you have one business over here that says, I'm not going to let anybody in without a mask, and the other one says you can come into my business with no mask, right? Eventually the market will tell you where you have to be as a business. But in this case, we're going to let the state come in and tell us what we're going to do. I just think it's poor public policy.
To that point, I went to a restaurant once a few years back, and it was a breakfast spot. And somebody was like, well, we could go to this place, pretty good, but I think it might be closed today. We can go to this place. And I was like, what's wrong with the other place? So we go, and I think somebody had mumbled like politically correct. I'm like, I've never been here. Like, I don't understand what you're doing. And we go in, and all the tables are spaced way out. It's like this huge open area now. Everybody walking around in masks, which is fine. None of my affair. And there was this sterility to it that was like, oh, this is not a very comfortable place to like eat breakfast. Now, I don't know anything about the owners or the employees or anything, but I understood very quickly. I'm like, okay, this is not a place that I would really like to come back to and exchange money for food. Like, this is not a setting that I enjoy. So to your point, if you allow the market to work, then it's like, okay, some people, will accept some things. Other people will design their businesses around other things. And, we all move on, right? That's it. Now, again, to be really clear, the I get where people are objecting to what we saw over COVID, because I could not object more either. That the idea that you were going to divulge medical information that should be absolutely private information, whether or not people got vaccinated, things of this nature, that's not something you need to show a door person as you're going into like a bar or a restaurant or something like that. Like, that's not appropriate. But going so far as to say we now prohibit anybody from denying patronage to somebody, it's like, wait a minute, we should still have private businesses that can still have, like, they shouldn't be able to pry, right? That's not good. But they also should still have autonomy to deny business to customers.
Yeah, for whatever reason, other than probably race, I think that they should be able to have that autonomy to choose what they want on their private property with their business, their reputation at stake. And the market will drive that.
Could you imagine if there was like a restaurant that was still trying to get by on the race one? Be like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah, exactly.
You're not going to make. I have always wondered, if you eliminated that provision, if the market forces would just drive that business out of existence instantaneously. I don't know. This is not a conversation we need to have.
I think eventually, if you have too strenuous of requirements, as a business, you'll be out of business. Just like if you require too many things of your employees and the neighboring business isn't, and it's the very same type of business, your employees will gravitate to the one that fits their needs, their wants, their requirements. And I think the same thing needs to go for private businesses. If I have one theater that says, sure, you can come in if you got measles, and the other one says no, and people that are thinking, right, I don't want my kid to have measles, goes to the one that says no, I think that the other business will probably be out of business in a very short time period, and the other one will keep going. So I think the market can drive itself without having all these laws to require us to do all these things. And I think sometimes the pendulum swings way too much, and I think we need to step back and quit writing laws for things that have happened and start looking forward to moving on to other things that we really need to deal with.
Yeah, and again, to your earlier point, I think a base level of restriction is a good thing to maintain dignity and civil rights within a community. And, beyond that, it's like, let the businesses operate. Okay, let's talk about E-Verify and ag labor forces. Now, this is something that I didn't know anything about until recently, pretty much until last year. And I had Luke and Kinney from Marsing Ag Labor on. Do you remember last year? I think it was April, when the whole 3 busloads of illegal immigrants just got dropped off in Boise. You may not remember that. There was this mass social media thing, and somebody had a video of, Hispanic looking people standing outside a China buffet with a bus nearby. They're like, they're dropping off illegal immigrants. And what was wild, it was like, you realize it's the end of April, right? Like, look around you. Like, who do you think is coming into the area? We have mass immigration, legal or, just workforces that are coming in. And it turned out, in fact, that Sheriff Clifford from Ada County Sheriff's Office did, in fact, send out people to check in with the individuals hanging out outside China Buffet. And they're like, we're H2A going to Oregon. They weren't even, they just stopped for dinner. They're these poor people that were just getting some greasy spoon Chinese, and they stopped, and all of a sudden people flipped out.
We had the same thing happen down in the Treasure Valley, where
God,
all these buses, they came and they dropped them off at a Walmart. But what it was is those buses brought in the crews for multiple different farms that were much smaller, right? And so it was a public type of thing. And so you have all these conspiracy theorists. They're like, oh, they're coming in, they're dropping off. No, those people are here on a legal visa. They have an employer that's responsible for them, an employer that has to make sure that they return to their home country as soon as their job is done. And people just, instead of stopping, and I think this is where we got so intolerant during COVID, that we stopped listening to people and actually had real conversations, that we should find out about this before we jump on somewhere and just start making assumptions about situations that aren't correct.
Oh, it's wild. It's wild. And what's interesting too, so there's this whole problem with, look, we live in an agricultural state. People, dum-dums like me who move here and don't understand exactly what you're describing. Luke brought up that same thing. He said, listen, and he sent me a picture of it. He's like, here's a school bus that's an old school bus that is used to transport ag workers two Walmart, two theaters, two places where they can do things on the weekend because they are housed. H-2A workers get housed, right? It's like they get housed here. They don't all have cars to be able to go to the store or go to the movies or go do, sporting events, things like that. It's like, so they transport them in large vehicles to places so they can enjoy their, life effectively.
Well, what people don't understand under that H-2A contract is you're required as an employer to take them to town once a week, to allow them to do their shopping, to allow them to do their laundry, to allow them to do their banking and all those kind of things. And the reality is we have to have a vehicle that is roadworthy. It can't even have that can't literally we have inspections on our vehicles as well as on the housing, because if I know a farmer that farmed next to us in one of our areas and they had a tail light out and it started out as a $25,000 fine because the tail light was missing. Now, if it had been a group of American workers in that same vehicle, there would not have been a $25,000 fine that was trying to be levied on that employer. So the requirements for us to have those kind of labor programs are very stringent. Like you have to now, and this came up in the last year, you either have to have a way for them to do their laundry now on site, or if you take them into town, then you have to pay for that laundry service for them to use the laundromat and those kind of things. So there's a lot of misconceptions about, it's cheap labor we're bringing in. That labor in Idaho is driven by a wage labor survey. It's over $16.54 an hour right now. That was last year's wage. I don't know what it is
Sure.
so far this year. But I mean, we have to provide housing, food, and accommodations from the minute they leave their door till the minute they get to our door. Then we're required to transport them from their place that they're staying to our place of business every single day on our dime. We have to take them into town, like I said, and then we are required at the end to make sure that their visa gets stamped that they leave this country. So it's a very regimented program. And if you have an employee that doesn't somehow jumps off that bus or doesn't go back on that bus, then that employee is ineligible to come in a future year if they don't leave the country within the time that's stamped on their visa that they come in under.
Gotcha. Okay. This brings us broad issue back to E-Verify. Now we as a country have been experiencing a huge problem with illegal immigrants, and the border has been wide open, just people flooding in. I actually spoke with Senator Crapo about this on an interview that actually just published today, which is great. And he was like, listen, I have my suspicions about different motivations, but one thing for sure is that there was no pressure for immigrant labor reform or labor reform in general when we theoretically were getting all of this labor, just elite, and nobody was deporting people. So we eliminated the conversation about labor reform because we essentially stopped enforcing.
Stopped enforcing the border.
Stopped enforcing the border and stopped enforcing deploy. I don't want to misquote him, but check out that interview if you guys are interested. But the point is that this brings us to E-Verify, where people are talking a lot about like, okay, well, we need to put the burden of verification of citizenship and legal status on employers. And that's not what employers are designed to do. And in fact, the laws as they stand right now prohibit employers from questioning authenticity of documents, from requiring additional documentation based on how someone looks or what they say. Like, you have to accept documentation that's provided to you by the person seeking employment. And if you go against that, if you push back or you ask for different stuff, you stand to be roundly sued very aggressively.
So what it is we are required to, on its face, if it appears to be correct, we have to accept that documentation. There have been 2 businesses in the state of Idaho that have been sued for trying to go further than what was required by federal law. That was Crookham Seed and it was Smith Fruit Farms or something at one point. And what people don't realize is if I tried to go above and beyond what is required on that I-9 form, which I am required as an employer to have the I-9 form, if I go above and beyond and require more documentation, I can be turned into the Department of Labor and the Department of Justice. So I have a very small lane that I can operate within to make sure that the people that I'm hiring are legal. And so we stay in that lane. What people don't realize is that if we knowingly hire illegals, that we know that they've come to us and said, hey, I'm not legal, but here's my paperwork, whatever, I can be fined up to $27,000 per employee for every employee if I'm committing fraud or conspiracy or any of those kind of things under the existing laws right now. The fine is huge for us. So to think that people are out there, and I think this is the common misconception, is that all these employers are out there knowingly hiring undocumented workers, illegals, however you want to say it. We're not. We're following the law that we've been given. I think another thing that most people do not understand about the E-Verify system is that about 60% of the time you'll have false information that comes back. They'll say this guy isn't eligible. And so then you're issued a temporary noncompliance. They have 10 days to fix that. Then if they issue a final noncompliance, you can't hire that employee again. But the problem is the employee has to take off probably a day's worth of work to try and get into the Social Security office to get it fixed. And sometimes it's a matter, especially where you have Hispanics, because they kind of have two last names. And some people have de la in them, meaning house of, and some things like that. So there can be a lot of problems with them trying to authenticate that. And so that's why you have, and even the feds themselves will tell you that the Social Security database, we know from Elon Musk that they had 350-year-old people that were still on the Social Security rolls, that their databases are terrible. So you're going to put in peril Idaho businesses on a database that is less than reliable is a very poor practice at this point.
And again, to be clear, this is a federal problem. Right? Immigration is a federal thing. Like the idea that we would turn individual employers within the state of Idaho or within the nation into like mini ICE, verification systems. It's like, this is not what you're designed to do. You don't have the manpower, you don't have the mechanisms, the technology. And again, it's not your purview. It's like, I take the documentation provided, I store that documentation. If it appears to be inauthentic, then great, I can take action. But if it appears to be authentic, I have to move forward in that manner. And we should not have people walking around just being like, I'm the arbitrator of, what's reality or not from an immigration standpoint, unless you're an immigration agent.
Well, I think the other bigger problem we have is we need to require Congress to do their job. This is a federal issue. The feds will never fix this issue if we don't make them uncomfortable enough that they fix this issue. So it's a congressional issue. I know Mike Simpson several times has tried to tackle it with the Workforce Modernization Act multiple times. And you just get everybody that doesn't want to touch it, or they were ready to touch it, and then a new president was going to come in. So the new administration wanted to take credit for it. So, I mean, you have all these problems. And in the meantime, you have a bunch of employers that get caught in the middle where people think that we're all evil when that's not the case. But if you try to institute E-Verify in Idaho, you are now taking on, first off, it's clear in the Constitution that that's a federal issue, not a state issue. That's the first thing. Second thing is if you make Idaho have all these stringent E-Verify and all the surrounding states do not, and we don't have any sort of guest worker program, what's going to happen to these industries? You're going to send them off the cliff right now today to prove a point of some sort when everybody's following the law right now, the way it's written. So, and they also had a thing, it would add more government bureaucracy to the state of Idaho, because then they're going to pull your business licenses, and they're going to have the AG's office is going to keep a list, and then you're going to have to report to them. And I mean, all these things. And what people don't realize is we have had so much regulation as a business. My daughter the other day, as I was talking to her, she goes, if they have a hearing, I'm going to testify, because the amount of regulation just on our business, just on the farm, we're going to have a full-time person to meet all the regulation stuff that we have to do right now without adding more. It's a tiring issue. It really is. It's a lot.
But your point with, look, they're not going to fix it unless they feel the brokenness. And again, having an open border or putting the burden on individuals instead of saying, look, this is our problem to solve. We need to fix this. That makes perfect sense to me, which is like, we just want to avoid this. We either want to avoid the border or we want to avoid doing what we're asking businesses to do. We just want to avoid it. We don't want to take a position, and it shouldn't be our problem. It's like, no, feds, it is your problem.
Well, at the end of the day, you don't want to have business owners have to be basically be the policeman. That's not our job. We're to provide a job for people. We're trying, in my case, we're trying to feed the world or feed the United States. And so we get to make a choice in this country. Do we want to offshore our food, or do we want to bring in employees from out of country to fill the jobs that Americans do not want to do? And I think that that is a really important part of the conversation we need to start having. And for me, I've been to foreign countries, and I'm telling you, they do not have the food safety standards that we have in the United States. They don't have the chemical and those kind of standards on what they're putting on their crops. And so if we want to have good food and have a secure food source, we've got to tackle this problem.
Okay. Last one before I let you go, because I know your time is limited. Transparency. Now, there is a large conversation in the state of Idaho around transparency with outside forces, outside money, both in campaigns and during political careers. Talk to me about transparency.
So currently, if you're an in-state business that has lobbyists, or you lobby the legislature in any way, you have required reporting that you're required to report, depending upon whether we were in session or in an election cycle. It would depend every 30 days. Sure. And the new bill would seek to do it on the off years that it has to be done quarterly type thing, except for if you're in the legislature. The problem you've had is you have out-of-state groups, dark money, whether it be the George Soroses or the far right money, either way, that they were skirting the laws that are in this state. And so either we're going to have to make it so that these people have to come in and give it to a campaign, and then that campaign uses the money to send their people to these workshops, or they need to disclose it. And so when I first submitted my first bill, first draft of my bill, I had that they had to tell you the value. And I got pushback from people on the state affairs. They didn't want that on there. So I said, great, I'll take it off of there. So I brought it back. When I brought it back, it didn't have the amount. It just said you had to tell when you went, where you went, what the purpose was, and who paid for it. I think that's pretty simple. Takes probably less than 3 minutes to do, or 2 minutes to do. Right. But that people in the state would know where the influence was coming. And the reason I did this bill is because earlier this year, as I was talking to the Legislative Services Office, which is the people that draft our bills and things, they said the amount of out-of-state bills that they would have, somebody would bring in. And the problem with those is they might be based on Florida's Constitution, or on Texas's Constitution, or on Utah's Constitution, but they weren't relevant to Idaho's Constitution. And so they were trying to meld these bills based into Idaho's Constitution, but they were also for problems we haven't had in the state of Idaho. So we're writing bills for boogie monsters, right? Rather than writing bills for actual problems that we have in this state. And it was for those of us that were trying to get bills done that we're trying to deal with actual in-state problems. In my example, I was working on water issues and needed water bills drafted. Well, the people are so tied up on these out-of-state bills that were being brought in, out-of-state lobbyists wanting us to write bills for situations and a lot of it is so they can make a political statement. It's not necessarily about actual good governance. It's about making political statements. And so I had this bill that had been drafted and couldn't get it out. In the meantime, there was I want to say a Watergate type situation with legislators about them having gone on an out-of-state trip. And it just so happened my bill was already in the pipeline, but it looked like I may have been targeting a group, which was not the case. So when we went on the floor a week ago, it shut down the whole legislature that afternoon because it got pretty fiery in the debate. And you had one guy that said it's a caste system because if somebody could afford to do their travel, they wouldn't have to report it. And another one that said, why should we be held to higher standards? And then another one that said, if we're going to have a real transparency bill, this is not the bill. But it was a smokescreen because these are the people that are going on these junkets, going on these trips, and they just haven't wanted people to know where they're going. And I think that the voters and the constituents in this state need to know where this influence is coming from and who's paying for it. I mean, last year in the election cycle, I think for between $2 and $3 million, basically they came in and bought the influence that they wanted in our state legislature that then changed who was there. And that's why you're seeing our legislature move even further to the right. And so instead of actually, and I have had more complaints from constituents and people saying to me, what are you guys doing over there? Why aren't you taking care of real Idaho problems, roads, bridges, schools, things that we actually need? Why are you dealing with all these issues that haven't been an issue in this state? And you're like, it's because we're having so much out of state influence. And it's a problem because in-state businesses are already having to report this. If an in-state business, I'll use an example. I went back east with the dairy gentleman a year ago, last summer, to talk about immigration, visa programs, things like that. Well, because they're an in-state lobbying group, they had to report that. But you have a Young Americans for Liberty, for example, that they're an out-of-state group. They don't have to have the same requirements because they're an out-of-state PAC. And they had this specific group that actually, when they went and then cases were filed with the Secretary of State, they had taken a group of 8 or 10 legislators, and y'all had only reported one of that entire group.
Oh, so they had transported, the y'all organization had transported 8 or 9 legislators to something, to an event
to
of
some
something.
event. I don't know if it was in Texas or Florida.
And irrelevant. But the point is, like, they footed the bill for these people to go somewhere and engage in something, and then brought them back. And then in their filing, they only admitted to doing it with one person, when in reality it was 8 or 9. So they're even within their limited filing, they're not being 100% transparent.
Right. And so if you just make each legislator has to basically and they're not going to have to figure out the amount, which that was some of the complaint, is they won't have to figure out the amount. But the reality is if they have to start reporting, first off, you may not have people going to quite so many conferences. A person that priorly served in the area from where I'm from, man, he was trying to figure out how to go on a trip a week from the time he was out of the legislature till he got back the next one, because he just liked to go on trips.
Sure.
And I just don't necessarily think that that's the best for us. I think we're a part-time legislature so that we can go home, we can interact with our communities, that we talk to the people, our superintendents and our teachers and all those kind of things. Because there are problems in other states with certain groups and organizations, but now we've basically said, oh, we have these same problems, when we don't. I mean, go talk to the people in your community, go talk to your sheriffs, go talk to your Rotary clubs, go talk to your chambers of commerce. But instead, we're having this out-of-state influence, and it's not relevant to Idaho. And so we're adding law after law that maybe we just don't need. But it caused a big ruckus. And the caste system part of it was the funniest, because they said, well, if you pay for your own, that's not fair because you should have to report it. And I'm like, but they're not paying for that. Outside group isn't paying for the influence on me. If I'm paying for it myself, I'm paying for it either for my own education or because I want to be indoctrinated a certain way. And I guess that's my right.
Right, obviously. And if you make the assumption where it's like, listen, if unless you're reporting, you're paying for it by yourself. So by not reporting, that is in fact reporting that you paid for it by yourself. Like, it's like, I only need to report if somebody else paid for it. So if there is no report, then the de facto, obviously position is Matt paid for it, whatever it might be. Listen, I know you're crunched on time.
Oh, I gotta add one last part to that.
Please. I was going to say whatever you, because I don't want to run over here.
No, we're good. So one of the complaints, or one of the big complaints, was the fact that why should I, as a legislator, be held to a higher standard than I'm requiring of other people? Which is kind of funny, because we have required all kinds of transparency through education systems, through transportation, through all these different things. And yet all of a sudden now we're saying, well, why should I be held to a higher standard? You know why I should be held to a higher standard? It's because I'm making the laws for everybody else in this state. I think my behavior, my actions, my interactions, I think they need to be above and beyond reproach. I think that I need to be the one that is setting the stage and setting the example, so that other people are like, you know what? That's the way we all ought to be acting. We all ought to have integrity. And that was one of the key things that I said is integrity. Our integrity is the only currency we have in that building and with our voters. And if they don't trust us, then what do we have left?
Representative Mickelsen, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming in today. Thanks for making the time. And I hope we can do this again.
Anytime.